It starts with a ticking clock, a 10-day ultimatum from Donald Trump that leaves no room for negotiation and no space for subtle diplomacy. The message is simple but severe: stop all talks with Vladimir Putin or face the consequences. In the high-stakes world of global politics, such a move is more than a headline. It's a warning shot across the bow of the international order. This is not just about the US and Russia. It's about the ripples that spread when two superpowers lock into confrontation mode. And those ripples are already turning into waves. Senator Lindsey Graham's fiery exchange with Dmitry Medvedev has only poured gasoline on an already volatile fire, while the European Union's sudden step back from a US brokered deal hints at deeper cracks in Western unity. These developments are not isolated. They're interconnected threads in a rapidly tightening knot of geopolitical tension. What we're witnessing is the reshaping of alliances, the testing of loyalties, and the possibility of a world order where the old rules no longer apply. The question is, who will adapt, who will resist, and who will be left behind? Trump's 10-day ultimatum to halt all talks with Putin is not merely a policy decision. It's a strategic signal, one designed to draw an unmistakable line in the sand. In the language of power politics, such deadlines are not only about the immediate issue at hand, but about demonstrating resolve, projecting strength, and forcing clarity in a landscape where ambiguity often reigns. For decades, the art of diplomacy has relied on subtlety, on keeping channels open even when disagreements run deep. But this move flips that script, trading the quiet handshake for the loud slam of a door. That's not just a shift in tactics, it's a shift in worldview, one that says the era of endless talks without consequences is over. This kind of ultimatum compresses the decision-making window for other leaders. It forces allies and adversaries alike to declare their position without the comfort of prolonged negotiation. In psychological terms, it transforms the political stage into a pressure cooker, where hesitation becomes costly and indecision dangerous. When a superpower issues a time-bound demand, it's not only testing the opponent's will, it's testing the reactions of the entire geopolitical audience. How quickly do others align? Who hesitates? Who tries to hedge? Every move, every pause, every carefully chosen word in this period becomes a signal in itself, shaping the balance of trust and suspicion across the globe. Of course, there is a risk in such an approach. Ultimatums narrow options, and once they are issued, stepping back can appear as weakness. The 10-day deadline is as much a trap for its issuer as it is for its recipient. It demands follow-through. This is where the real psychological tension lies, in the credibility of enforcement. If the demand is ignored and nothing happens, the statement collapses under its own weight. If it is enforced too aggressively, it may ignite conflicts that could have been contained. In that sense, the ultimatum becomes a razor's edge, where strength and recklessness are separated by the thinnest of margins. But perhaps that's the point. In Trump's political style, ambiguity is often seen as indecision, and decisiveness, even at the cost of confrontation, is marketed as leadership. The 10-day cutoff is not just aimed at Putin, it's aimed at a domestic audience that values the image of a leader who acts rather than deliberates. It appeals to the human preference for clarity in a chaotic world, for firm boundaries in a time when so much feels uncertain. People often forget that politics is as much theater as it is governance, and in this performance, the clock ticking down is part of the drama. The danger and the opportunity lie in the same place: the fact that a hard deadline accelerates the pace of history. In 10 days, the political landscape could shift in ways that normally take months or years. And once that clock runs out, the world will know whether this ultimatum was a masterstroke of strategic pressure, or the opening act of a crisis no one can control. In high-stakes diplomacy, time is never just a measurement, it is a weapon. Lindsey Graham's clash with Dmitry Medvedev is more than just a war of words. It's a collision of two political cultures that operate on entirely different wavelengths. On one side, you have Graham embodying the American tradition of direct confrontation, where calling out an adversary is part of the political playbook. On the other, you have Medvedev, steeped in the Russian approach to power, where messaging is often layered with irony, historical grievance, and an instinct to turn every exchange into a narrative about strength and resistance. When these two figures meet, there is no middle ground. Their words are not just statements, but deliberate acts of psychological positioning. In high-level geopolitics, verbal duels are rarely about the literal meaning of the words spoken. They're about signaling to multiple audiences at once: domestic supporters, international observers, and, most importantly, the opponent across the table. Graham's remarks are designed to reassure allies and unsettle adversaries, to project unwavering resolve. Medvedev's counterpunches aim to undermine that resolve, framing America's position as hypocritical or strategically flawed. This is the dance of perception management, and both men know that in the modern world, perception often shapes reality as much as actual policy does. There's also a deeper philosophical element to this exchange. When Graham speaks, he's appealing to a worldview that sees moral clarity as a strategic asset, drawing sharp lines between right and wrong, friend and foe. Medvedev, by contrast, operates from a perspective in which such clarity is a weakness, something to be blurred and exploited. To him, ambiguity is not confusion but a tool, allowing for tactical flexibility and the ability to reinterpret events in a way that benefits Russia's narrative. The clash, then, is not just about current events. It's about the very nature of truth and power in international relations. What makes this confrontation even more consequential is that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It feeds into broader alliances, rivalries, and negotiations that are unfolding simultaneously. Every strong statement from Graham will be parsed in European capitals, in Beijing, in NATO's headquarters, and in Moscow itself. Similarly, every barb from Medvedev will be replayed in Russian media, used to bolster domestic support for a defiant stance against the West. These exchanges become part of the architecture of global tension, small in isolation, but significant when added to the growing weight of distrust and hostility. Ultimately, the Graham-Medvedev confrontation is a reminder that words can be as potent as weapons when they are strategically deployed. In politics, especially at this level, language is not just communication. It's maneuvering, it's boundary setting, it's the shaping of the psychological battlefield before the real one ignites. The lesson here is that every public clash between major players is never just an argument. It's a test of will, a display of competing narratives, and a rehearsal for the decisions that will define the future. And when the words fade, the consequences they set in motion will still remain. The European Union's quiet retreat from a U.S. deal is not just a diplomatic adjustment. It's a revealing moment that speaks volumes about the deeper fault lines running through the Western alliance. On the surface, it might look like strategic recalibration, the kind of maneuver states make when circumstances shift. But beneath that, it reflects a fundamental tension that has always existed between the idea of transatlantic unity and the practical realities of national interest. The EU has always walked a tightrope between aligning with U.S. foreign policy and safeguarding its own economic and political priorities. When that balance tips, the rhetoric of solidarity quickly gives way to the pragmatism of self-preservation. This kind of maneuvering isn't necessarily betrayal. It's the nature of international politics. Alliances are rarely built on unconditional loyalty. They're built on overlapping interests. When those interests start to diverge, even slightly, the glue holding the partnership together begins to weaken. The EU's position here is a reminder that no matter how many summits are held or how often unity is proclaimed, each member state ultimately answers to its own voters, its own industries, and its own geopolitical calculations. The U.S. can talk about shared values, but Brussels has to think about energy prices, trade dependencies, and the political climate within its own borders. What makes this moment particularly significant is the timing. When tensions are high and global power competition is intensifying, even small cracks in an alliance can have outsized consequences. Rivals watch closely for these signs of hesitation, because hesitation suggests vulnerability. Moscow, Beijing, and other actors are skilled at exploiting such moments, framing them as evidence that the West is fractured and inconsistent. Whether that perception is accurate or not matters less than the fact that it can be weaponized. There's also a psychological element at play here, something that often gets overlooked. For decades, The EU has been accustomed to operating under the shadow of American leadership. But as the global order becomes more multipolar, there is a growing desire in Europe to assert a more independent role, to be a pole of power in its own right. Pulling back from a US deal, even quietly, can be seen as part of that process, a way of signaling autonomy without making an outright break. The irony is that this pursuit of independence, while understandable, can weaken the very alliances that give Europe much of its leverage in the first place. In the end, the EU's decision is not just about policy, it's about identity. Is Europe content to be the junior partner in a US-led order? Or is it determined to chart its own course, even if that means greater risk? That question will define more than just this moment. It will shape the trajectory of Western unity for years to come. And if history teaches us anything, it's that hesitation in the face of collective challenge rarely strengthens a position. It only invites those watching to test the limits further. Lindsey Graham's clash with Dmitry Medvedev is more than a sharp exchange of political rhetoric. It's a reflection of a larger and more dangerous game being played on the world stage. Political confrontations of this kind are never just about the personalities involved. They are about the ideas, the power structures, and the narratives each side seeks to project. Graham's approach, direct and uncompromising, signals to both allies and adversaries that the United States will not soften its stance in the face of Russian provocation. But from Moscow's perspective, Medvedev's sharp counterattacks are not simply defensive. They are calculated attempts to expose what they perceive as hypocrisy, overreach, or weakness in the American position. The danger in moments like this is not that one politician says something inflammatory, but that the exchange becomes part of a feedback loop. Every public jab demands a counterpunch. Every accusation must be met with an equally forceful rebuttal. This escalation is not confined to words. It shapes public opinion, affects diplomatic channels, and influences the risk calculus of military and economic strategy. It's in this space, between rhetoric and action, that the seeds of real conflict are sown. The words themselves might be dismissed as political theater, but the perceptions they create, both at home and abroad, have tangible consequences. There's also a deeper psychological component to these confrontations. Strong political personalities thrive on confrontation because it reaffirms their image as defenders of national pride and moral clarity. In a polarized environment, confrontation becomes currency. It can solidify one's base of support and reinforce the belief that we are standing firm against them. This is why leaders on both sides sometimes embrace hardline rhetoric, even when it complicates the possibility of resolution. The cost of appearing weak is perceived to be far greater than the cost of prolonging hostility. And yet there is a paradox here. While such clashes can energize domestic audiences and send signals of strength, they can also lock both parties into positions from which it becomes politically impossible to back down. This is where diplomacy becomes suffocated by pride. The longer the public exchange continues, the narrower the options become for de-escalation without someone appearing to lose face. History is littered with examples of conflicts that could have been contained early but were instead fueled by the inability of leaders to break free from the cycle of provocation and retaliation. When viewed in the broader arc of this moment in history, the Graham-Medvedev confrontation is more than a headline. It's a symbol of the high-stakes tensions defining the current geopolitical landscape. It's a reminder that words, when delivered from a position of authority, carry weight far beyond the moment they are spoken. They shape the narrative of an era, and in doing so, they influence the decisions that will either prevent or precipitate future crises. The challenge for leaders today is not only to defend their values with conviction, but also to ensure that in doing so, they don't unwittingly close the door to solutions. For once that door is sealed, history shows that it's far easier to stumble into conflict than to find the way back out. In the end, this clash is not just about two men trading political blows. It's about the dangerous inertia that takes hold when national pride, public perception, and strategic power collide. Every sharp word edges the players further into a position where backing down feels like surrender, and that is when history tends to turn darkest. Strength is not simply the ability to confront an adversary. It is the wisdom to know when confrontation stops serving your long-term interests. If leaders cannot master that balance, the path ahead will not be written in diplomacy, but in the language of consequences that no one can fully control.